This will be a video connected, or I guess given motivation by our play of Circle of Hands recently. But it's connected across pretty much all the games that I play. It's connected in a very real, very distinct sense to the way that I play. My foundation, or my default belief about what is good play for me. So in Circle of Hands, there are a lot of things, or a lot of innovations or revisions or connections that are made, which demonstrates that the author has a deep love and a deep experience of what's out there in gaming. There's a whole lot of things, and from his perspective, certain things can fall into place conceptually that fit what it is that he's trying to do as a game designer. Now, when I personally read Circle of Hands, what I felt most strongly was that the author was speaking directly to me. Like, you there. Here is a game for you. And there are things in it which are some version of what I have evolved into doing over my time in gaming. And there are some parts which nudge me in a direction, more in that direction, or in a different direction. So it's very compelling. It's compelling to look at someone else's point of view of playing this way. It's also compelling to say, maybe this way of playing has a broader area than you might have considered, or because you're here on the spectrum and the author might be here on that spectrum, our overlapping Venn diagrams of interest or whatever go into different perspectives or different categories and the like. So have you considered this? Plus, reading an idea which was formulated in your own head without any kind of label, without anybody pushing back and helping you define, its shape, its limits, its actual functions, its methods. Being able to read someone else's words on that idea really helps things click. So this particular video, which has had a ridiculously long intro, is about one particular method or technique placed into Circle of Hands specifically to help that game be what it was intended to be. And that is Tripwires, as you knew 3.5 minutes ago from the title. So we're going to talk about two specific techniques so that we can have this discussion. And these are my thoughts on Tripwires in general, and a little bit, the examples will come from Circle of Hands, because playing Circle of Hands, I'm trying to do the Ron Edwards version of a technique that he has called Tripwires in Circle of Hands. Okay, so first off, when we're introduced to tripwires in the text, it says, tripwires are not bangs, to paraphrase. So what's a bang? I don't think that the technique called tripwires or the technique called bangs will be a new or revelatory technique to many people. But giving it a specific name and a specific purpose in a specific game, I feel, is something that is worth discussion. And if they are new to you, or if they're something that you were doing without realizing you were doing, or if it's something that if you could just get a grip on it, you would start to do, then the discussion will pay off. So, tripwires are not bangs, so what is a bang? A bang, like it sounds, starts something. It is what I like to think of as a unit of information put into whatever it is that the game master is saying, or in some games, the other players are saying, which cause reactions or ripple effects. Bang! Something happens, and so now, right, the situation is altered. To put that into less abstract terms, the characters might be in their home area, going about their specific interests as characters when the bank is robbed. Bang! Now, if they're superheroes or if they're police investigators or whatever, there is something happening which draws attention. Bang! Okay, so this is not an element of information in the story which is tied to the internal life of the character or any particular motivation or archetype or that sort of thing. This is something that's happening. Bang! Tripwires are not bangs. Tripwires. They happen after something. I think this is really interesting, and describing it as tripwire, I think, is excellent. It, like bang, sinks right in there and communicates its meaning after you've seen it written out and helps you retain it so that you can employ it. Now, in Circle of Hands, tripwires are part of your preparation, and they're tied to the campaign of Circle of Hands. We're not going to get into that in this video, so I'd like this video to be more broadly applicable. So, for example, as I have been doing my preparation for Circle of Hands, my particular interest, my particular focus has been on tripwires as a reaction to character action. And I had a conversation with Ron Edwards recently where he pointed out that that is a limited view, and he's totally right. And I don't think of tripwires as just this limited view, but I definitely developed a myopic focus on tripwires as that during my Circle of Hands preparation. The Circle of Hands is so much about the characters. That's the lens through which I was viewing everything. And we had a very interesting conversation, which may appear on his channel at some point. So I'm not going to talk about it too much here, but the gradations of application for tripwires that we discussed definitely change how a scenario might play out. So, tripwires are if something happens, if someone does something, if this condition is not met, if this condition is met, right? It's put in place so that if during play there is a change brought about by the events of play, then you have a prepared, preconceived alteration of the circumstance, such as if the players delay going to that bank robbery, right? So this would be a tripwire connected to player action. If they delay, if they finish their own business and then show up at the bank robbery afterward, then the media will lose some favor toward them. Or if the players delay, same situation, same triggering characteristic, then copycat burglars will begin robbing banks on their own, muddying up the scene. A tripwire doesn't necessarily, as it says in Circle of Hands, need to target the players for worsening their situation. Although when you start thinking about it as if the players do something, then that's the natural, logical conclusion of your thought. So it's definitely something to be aware of and ask yourself, is this really the type of tripwire I want to put in place? Okay, so I believe this is something that many people do naturally, right? If something happens, right, then something else has to happen as a result. The tripwire is related to that activity, but is more focused. I want to talk a little bit about the placement of tripwires. It seems to me that because you are preconceiving what the condition that will be, what the consequence that will be applied after the thing is tripped, because you're preparing that in advance, there will be a tendency to push toward it, or there'll be a tendency to put it in the way of the most likely course of actions of your playgroup. And it strikes me that in some situations that might be effective. But in Circle of Hands play, or in play which is largely based around improvisation and discovery and collaboration and connection and recognition of what people are contributing into the mood of play, and their characterizations and things, that just dropping the tripwire right in front of where they're probably going to go, or where anybody given that information is likely to go, kind of thinking, is selling the technique short. It's not something that might be tripped then, it's something that will be tripped. You'll be surprised if it's not tripped, rather than surprised and pleased that it was. And so then it's just normal preparation, right? But if we're thinking about our environment, if we're thinking about the backdrop and the situation of play, right? The characters will be in this shared game space that your group has. And maybe if events align in a particular way that is possible, this additional thing will be tripped, and it will have consequences that affect the flow of your campaign, and consequences that might be directly felt right now by the characters. I think this is fascinating, and it's nice to put such an effective label on it for me. So, I'm particularly attracted to this technique more so than Bang's due to my own biases and preferences, the things that I like to put into play, rather than bang and kind of push things toward behavior. I much prefer to receive action and see if my understanding of the players, my understanding of the characters, my understanding of the setting and the genre and the tone enabled me to place an interesting tripwire in a place where people might encounter it, so that we can enjoy those consequences together as a result of them having tripped it. Now, in Circle of Hands, you're given a specific number, and they are there to, as I said before, strengthen the character's legacy in the campaign world. Looking back on them, through the misty lens of history and story and legend, was this an event in their lives which went well for them or poorly? And I just love this. I'm someone who never really leaves the game table. There's always questions and ideas and imagination going around in the back of my head. What would this NPC have really thought about such a thing? And what could have, would have, should have, right, might have happened next, before. So, and a technique like an explicitly laid out campaign technique like Tripwires is excellent. So, in other games, you can find yourself doing this. And you can see over my shoulder here, the Star Wars games. This is an ideal thing for that, where you are constantly getting additional feedback from the dice. You've got really interesting characters with a variety of different motivations pulling on them, such as obligations or duty or morality. And you've got the huge Star Wars galaxy and all of its conceits, like the Force, the tides of destiny, coincidence, and so on and so forth. All of these things to tie in Tripwires are a great, great thing. Pulp Heroics. So we see Hollow Earth Expedition back there, and All for One, Regime Diabolique. There are so many games where this is a technique you may already be doing without really being aware of, or without a specific refinement, or without any particular meta game consideration, like how this is actually going to affect some aspect of the game. You might be doing it just because it feels right, or it's how you grew up playing. But being able to talk about the technique, being able to give it a quick label, being able to explain it quickly, and then as a result be able to apply it to different situations, I think is really valuable. And it's a great example of what this channel is really all about. The ability to be able to talk about how we play, talk about how play evolves naturally, talk about how it's influenced by bias and preference and the oral tradition of play, the influence of our groups, of our friends, of the strangers that we get to meet and play with, the new games we read, the old games we reread and rediscover, all of these things, so that ultimately our own enjoyment can increase and our example can stand for others who are new to the hobby or returning to the hobby, and they wonder, can I really do this? Yes, you can, and you can have a great time. So anyway, Tripwires. You can find Tripwires in the Circle of Hands, explained explicitly, and then in Ron Edwards' game Sorcerer and its supplements. There are similar short, like one paragraph descriptions, like bangs, crosses, bobs, weaves, tripwires, and this sort of thing, which are a great way to start talking about what we actually do when we play. Anyway, thanks for watching.